You know, every year when Warren Buffett releases his letter to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders, it's so much more than just an annual report. For serious investors, it's basically required reading. The 2020 letter in particular is just packed with timeless wisdom on business, value, and really the right way to think. So let's break down the key lessons from this masterclass.
All right, before we get into the how, let's just talk about the results. Just look at this number. This is Berkshire Hathaway's overall gain in per-share market value from 1964 all the way to 2020. It's a figure that's almost hard to even wrap your head around, and it's exactly why we study these letters so closely. The proof is right there in the performance.
And here's what that number looks like when you put it side by side with the market. Over 56 years, Berkshire compounded at 20% a year. That's nearly double the S&P 500. And that overall gain? It's not just a little better. It's on an entirely different planet. Look, that kind of outperformance doesn't just happen by luck. It's the result of a very clear, very powerful philosophy. So what is it?
So in this explainer, we're going to distill that philosophy into a few key lessons. We'll talk about owning businesses, not just renting stocks. We'll get into the hidden power of repurchases, how to spot the real jewels in a portfolio, and finally, the partnership mindset that ties it all together.
Okay, let's get right into the first core principle. It's all about a shift in perspective, from being someone who just rents stocks to someone who actually owns a business. For Buffett, this is probably the single most important distinction an investor can ever make.
You see, for Buffett, the whole game changes when you realize you're not just buying a ticker symbol. You are buying a fractional piece of an actual business. You're a silent partner, and your real value comes from a claim on that company's long-term success. A huge part of that is driven by retained earnings. Those are the profits the company keeps and reinvests. It's like this invisible engine building value over time that you'll almost never see mentioned in a quarterly report.
And this slide really highlights the stark difference between the Berkshire way and what Buffett calls the conglomerator trap. You had these old-school conglomerates that were just obsessed with deals, buying up so-so companies at crazy prices, and often using their own inflated stock to do it. Berkshire is the complete opposite. Find great businesses, pay a fair price, and let their internal value grow. One way gets you a junkyard of businesses. The other gets you a fortress.
And this quote, just perfectly and pretty hilariously, sums up the whole game they were playing. It's a sharp critique of creating the illusion of value through slick financial engineering. It's a timeless warning to focus on business quality, not just clever accounting.
So, once you have that ownership mindset, how does it actually create tangible value? Well, that brings us to one of the most powerful and honestly most misunderstood tools in the playbook. The share repurchase.
Let's make this real with a perfect case study: Berkshire's investment in Apple. By the middle of 2018, Berkshire had put about $36 billion to work and owned 5.2% of Apple, arguably one of the best businesses on the planet.
Now here's the first part of the magic. Apple, being the cash-generating machine that it is, was constantly buying back its own stock. And as the total number of shares out there shrinks, every remaining share represents a slightly bigger piece of the whole pie. It happens automatically.
And here's the result. Simply because Apple was buying back its shares, Berkshire's ownership stake grew from 5.2% to 5.4%. They got a bigger claim on Apple's future profits without lifting a finger or spending a single extra dime. It cost them nothing. But this is where it gets really interesting, where the effect gets compounded. Because during that same time, Berkshire was also busy buying back its own stock, spending almost $25 billion on it in 2020 alone. So now, each share of Berkshire stock represents a bigger piece of all its assets, including that already growing stake in Apple. It's a 1-2 punch.
So what does this all mean for a Berkshire shareholder? Here's the bottom line. Through this double-layered repurchase effect, you indirectly owned 10% more of Apple's business than you did just 2.5 years earlier. It's this slow, quiet, but incredibly powerful way to increase your ownership in fantastic companies. This whole dynamic perfectly captures a quote Buffett loves from Mae West: "Too much of a good thing can be wonderful." I mean, when you own a piece of a truly great business, having that piece just get bigger and bigger at no cost to you, well, that's exactly the kind of wonderful you want. Of course, this whole repurchase magic only really works if the business you own is in fact a good thing. So that brings us to the next logical lesson. How do you even spot these jewels worth owning in the first place?
In the letter, Buffett is pretty clear that most of Berkshire's massive value really sits in 4 main pillars.
You have their giant property and casualty insurance operations, the BNSF Railway, their huge stake in Berkshire Hathaway Energy, and of course that 5.4% position in Apple. These are the crown jewels, and they all have a few things in common.
So what makes a business a jewel? Well, sometimes it's a bond with the customer that is just unbreakable. Buffett tells the story of See's Candy. After 100 years, the customer's message is simple: don't mess with my candy. That right there is the ultimate competitive advantage, a product people love so much they feel like they own it. When your customer's the boss and the boss is happy, you've got a jewel.
Another sign of a jewel is a powerful founder-led culture. And there's really no better story than that of Rose Blumkin, Mrs. B, a Russian immigrant who couldn't speak a word of English but started Nebraska Furniture Mart with just $2,500. She and her family turned it into a retailing miracle. It's these kinds of entrepreneurial stories that Buffett absolutely loves to be a partner in.
So when you put all these lessons together, owning businesses, leveraging repurchases, finding the jewels, you realize they're all held together by a single foundational philosophy. It's the bedrock of everything Berkshire does.
And here it is. It's a principle from way back in the 1983 annual report, but it defines the company to this day. Although our form is corporate, our attitude is partnership. What that means is treating shareholders not like fleeting speculators, but like long-term partners in a family business. It's about managing their capital as if it were your own.
And this partnership mindset is combined with this incredible sense of optimism. You know, the stories of Mrs. B and See's Candy, they're proof of what Buffett calls the American incubator for unleashing human potential. His conclusion, through thick and thin, through every market cycle, is always simple and powerful. Never bet against America.
So as we close this analysis of Buffett's masterclass, it leaves us with a pretty good question to reflect on for ourselves. We spend so much time analyzing companies for their competitive moats, their brands, their patents, their network effects. But what this letter suggests is that for us as investors, maybe the most durable competitive advantage of all isn't something you can find on a balance sheet. Maybe it's our own patience.